Okay.
So Diana, I think we can probably start now. And thanks for everyone to joining this afternoon and for making some time to follow our live webinar. Unfortunately, Anissa can't had an emergency and can't host the webinar. But Diane has been extraordinary for me and has really helped me a lot building the course. She was the one person I would always go to for advice when I was a little bit struggling, and she has a huge knowledge concerning wine and training in the camps in Africa, and I really think she will really be extraordinary for this webinar session with you guys. So I will hand over to her and yes, make the most out of it. Don't hesitate to ask questions. You can always email me after the webinar, and I can go through things in more details should you need more information. But I'm sure Diane will cover everything very well. Okay, excellent, guys. Have a nice session.
Great, Rich. Thank you for the introduction, and hello to everybody wherever you're signing in from. So I'm sure we have people from East Africa and Southern Africa. So hi to everybody. My name is Diane Chimboza, and I am the MD for Under the Influence East Africa, based in Nairobi, Kenya. We distribute to a lot of high-end camps and lodges, but we also do a lot of retail and a lot of restaurants. So hope to see a varied range of people on here. Some of you might have met me. I've done WOSA events in Uganda, in Kenya, and also in Zimbabwe. So just hope that everybody's doing okay, especially after COVID. I know that business has been slow for a lot of us. Alcohol bans, not being able to serve alcohol. So I hope that has changed and that business is starting to pick up for everybody. And now more than ever, I think it's important, if you guys are serving South African wine in your establishments, to really, really promote Drink South Africa and Spectacular South Africa. It was a program started by WOSA, and basically just to get people to buy more South African wine, because as you all know, during the pandemic they had really, really strict alcohol bans. So no exports for a while, no domestic sales. So even after exports opened up, it was still slow going, and recently they've allowed more alcohol sales in the country. But as much as you can, if you're outside of South Africa, please, please, please upsell and recommend as many South African wines as you can. So I'm just going to go through a Wine 101 course, just sort of a refresher for a lot of you guys. If anybody has any questions, please put them on the YouTube chat, and I will do my best to respond as well as I can. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen if I can. Just a second. Okay, sharing my screen now. So I hope you've all been enjoying the Wine 101 program. Okay, cool. So let's just go back to the beginning, right? What is wine? Everything begins in the vineyard. So what is wine? Wine is fermented grape juice, basically. You can use any type of fruits to make wine. Honestly, you can use apples, you can use peaches, you can use bananas. I know in Uganda they make a lot of wine from like mango juice and all of that. So really you can make wine from a lot of different things, but what we primarily drink 100% of the time, or 99% of the time, is wine fermented from grapes. But yeah, basically that's it. Different types of alcoholic beverages can be made from various fruits, such as apples, bananas, pineapples. But as long as they contain sugar, you can pretty much make alcohol from that. So what is the most sort of important process, which we'll talk about later, is fermentation, is what then gives us alcohol to make the wine. Yeah. So we're talking about it all begins in the vineyards, yeah? So to understand wine, we need to understand where it comes from and the different types of grapes. So if you had two grapes, if I was holding a table grape and a wine grape, even though they're both grapes, they're not, the table grapes are not the best for making wine. And this is basically because the table grape is much bigger, it's more crunchy, and then it has no seeds, yeah? But a wine grape, they're more distinct. So as you all know, we have red wine grapes and white wine grapes, yeah? So different types of grapes to give us different flavor profiles, different colors, from like a very, very dark, ruby red to a lighter style like a Pinot Noir, or for a light lemony green for a Sauvignon Blanc to more like a gold honey color for like Rieslings and Gewürztraminer. So all these different wine grapes then give us all of these different flavors and profiles. So wine grapes is traditionally much smaller. They have thicker skins, and then they also have seeds in them. Yeah. What's important to know is, everything you need to make wine comes from the grape itself, right? The whole fermentation process, it happens because everything that comes from the grape is used in fermentation, right? So the outside of the grape, right? We only use that for wine making, right? And the big difference between red wine and white wine is that for red wine we use the skins, and the skins are what gives us the color for red wines. Yeah, that's why white wines we don't use any of the skins, because we just want the color of the juice. Yeah. Then you've got the inside, we've got the seeds. We don't usually use seeds in winemaking because they release bitter oils, so it doesn't really add to the flavor profile. So basically, when we're making the wine, the juice, we have to just press it gently so that we don't break the seeds and release the bitter oils. So the heart of the grape, the sort of the pulp, is where we find sugar and acids, and that the sugar that we find naturally in the grape is that was then used in the fermentation process. Yeah. Cool. So that's just a quick summary on the different types of grapes. And guys, if you have any questions, please let me know. Right. Okay. Let's talk about terroir. In winemaking, terroir relates to the address of where the wine was made. It encompasses a range of factors from the topography, geography, climates, soil, fauna, and flora of where the grapes are grown to the hand of the winemaker in the cellar. I always like to say great wine is not made, it's always grown, and it always starts at the farm. It starts with the soil, it starts with the sunlight, it starts with the workers, it starts with all of that love for the land. But terroir is very, very important, because that is the reason why wines from one country don't taste the same anywhere else in the country, right? So we have what we call New World regions and Old World regions for growing wine. New World is typically most of the Southern Hemisphere, so that will include like South Africa, it will include Argentina, Chile, and then you will find also Australia and New Zealand. The New World is more Northern Hemisphere, so traditionally most of Europe, so France, Spain, Italy, and Germany. So we can grow grapes anywhere. You can grow grapes in your backyard if you really wanted. But what makes a good grape and then into great wine is all the factors around it. Yeah. And I always like to say that a winemaker is like a farmer. Everybody thinks like a winemaker is some fancy guy, just sniffing wine all day. But, at the end of the day, they are farmers and they are working the land, right? So if any of you are farmers, there's some very, very essential things for you to be able to get a good product at the end of your season. And it always has to be sort of your seed or your stock. In this case, it would be a really, really good vine. It's about water. How much water do you need? Do you need a lot of rainfall? Do you need a little bit of rainfall? Do you need to irrigate? And then it's about the soil, right? We all know that we have different types of soils in the world, right? Some stuff goes really, really great in some soil and others it doesn't, right? So the soil type that you have, how much water does it retain? Has it got a lot of clay? Has it got a lot of minerals that then add to the flavor? And then obviously we talk about the sun, right? The sunlight helps stuff to grow and to ripen the sugars and to make everything grow. And then terroir, if you're growing on a slope, how much sun are you getting in the morning? How much sun are you getting in the afternoon? If you're in a really, really hot place, do you have some cooling wind breezes coming in and sort of cooling everything down? So that's basically what terroir, it's the whole outside that makes us grow amazing grapes. So like I said, climate. So you can grow wine in hot climates and cool climates. Typically, South Africa is what we consider a hot climate because we're nearer to the equator. Same thing for Chile and South America as well. And then a cool climate is traditionally Europe because we're further away from the equator. So obviously like France, Italy, a little bit, and some Spain and Germany as well. We talked about the different types of soil. Depending on where you are, soil plays a great factor in sort of retaining nutrients, retaining heat, retaining water. And then the terrain, what other things do you have around you? Do you have elevation? Do you have slope? Do you have other flora? So for example, in South Africa, we know that there's a lot of what we call fynbos, right? So fynbos is such an amazing sort of wild plant species that's been around for thousands of years. And it has such a great influence on terroir. Some of the wines, some of the soils, all those beautiful flowers, all of those in the soil as well. And if you guys are interested in gin, if you know, South Africa is doing a lot of craft gin. So they've been taking a lot of these fynbos elements and, all these herbs and all of these wonderful things and, infusing them into their gin. So such an important thing. And then tradition, which is the most important factor, is the human factor, which is the people who work in the vineyards, who tend to the vines, who love these like they're their children, and then the winemaker, himself. What are his methods? Is he very much a traditionalist, or is he more open to technology in terms of how they do things? You can have two types of sort of farming methods. You can hand pick everything, pick the grapes, pick up the bad ones, or you can lose a lot of machinery, which is great because then you can produce more wine in bulk. But yeah, tradition, what the winemaker believes, how he wants to treat his grapes, how he wants to make his wine is very, very important, which is again why wines never taste the same. Okay, great. So does anybody have any questions? Let me just check on YouTube. I don't think so. If we go to the next point, just a little bit about South African terroir. It's made up of a diverse landscape with cool coastlines, dramatic mountain ranges, and valleys, as well as ancient soils. So if you guys have ever been to Cape Town, they have what they call the air conditioning that turns on every afternoon, and then that's the big wind coming in, and it cools all of the vineyards. So the diversity of terroir is truly unique in South Africa. So it makes you have a large variety of wines and lots of styles. So what we do have in South Africa is, even though we're traditionally a warm climate, because of all of these mountain regions and then cool coastlines, means we can have what we would call like cool climates. For example, this would be like Elgin, high up in the mountains. We've got Hermanus, we've got stuff in Walker Bay as well, and then you've got more of your hot areas. So traditionally Stellenbosch, and also in the Swartland Valley as well. Cool. So if we go back, we're done with terroir. Let's talk a little bit about flavor in wine and where this comes from. One of the questions I used to get a lot during training was, how does a wine taste like lemons and limes and strawberries and gooseberries and all these crazy things that people don't know about, right? And I talked about the different grapes, so fermentation is a very, very important process because it converts the sugars found naturally in the grape juice into alcohol, right? So for fermentation, you need two things. You need sugar, you need yeast, and then the byproduct is alcohol and carbon dioxide. So as I mentioned earlier, in the heart of the grape, the pulp, there's natural sugars. So when the winemaker adds the yeast, right? So what winemakers do, there's a lot of yeast that they use traditionally for winemaking. There's a lot of them. I don't know all the names, but basically when sugar and yeast come together, they release alcohol and carbon dioxide. Yeah. So if any of you guys have ever made like a traditional home brew, whatever whatever country you're in, here in Kenya, they make like Moratina, they make changa. Where I come from in Zimbabwe, they make kachasu and chibuku and all of these things, right? But the most important thing, they always need sugar, so something sweet, and then some yeast. Put it in the ground, ferment, and you get alcohol and carbon dioxide, which is the same thing that happens in wine, maybe a little bit more of a complicated process, yeah? So during this fermentation process, when yeast and, a grape marry, it's almost like all the flavors are sort of, locked in the heart and the pulp of the grape. Yeah. So during fermentation, the little yeast comes along and then he unlocks all of these flavors that you find in the grapes, because fermentation is, a chemical reaction. So when they come together and then bam, they burst open, and all of a sudden, all these beautiful, beautiful flavors come out. So each grape, right, has specific characteristics or flavor profiles that will come about during the fermentation. So the marriage of yeast and the grape then gives you all of these wonderful flavors. Yeah. So it's almost like you're unlocking and getting the key to the kingdom, I would say. So also important about fermentation, yeast are naturally found on the skin of the grapes. And sometimes if you see on a bottle of wine, it will say like a wild ferment. So that just means that the winemaker has left the skins on the grapes and he's just let the natural process happen without adding additional yeast. So that's what if you ever hear of the word wild ferment, that's what it means. But as I said, there's a lot of commercial yeast that people use. And this is then what they add to the skins or the grape juice to make the wine. Yeah. So yeast is a tiny, tiny little organism, but he's like a bad boy. He really, really brings out a lot of things. So let me I want to look up the flavor map. I don't know if you guys have your flavor map. You will usually find it in your book. Yeah, you should have it on your notes. So wine is split up into 4 different categories. We have light and fresh white wines. We have rich, round, and fruity white wines. We have medium-bodied and elegant. And then we have full-bodied and powerful. So I want to talk a little bit about body as well, right? So white wines are typically much lighter, much fresher, typically less alcohol than red wines, yeah? And that's during fermentation, all of that stuff happens, yeah? So when I talk about body, if you had, let's think of a beer. Let's say you had a Castle or a Tusker, right? You have a Castle Light, you have a Castle Malt, or then you have a Castle Regular, right? All of those beers don't taste the same in your mouth, right? Castle Light is actually much lighter, much fresher. You feel like you can drink more of it, especially on a hot day. It's not going to get you drunk as quick, but when you have it in your mouth, it's going to be a little bit lighter. Then let's move to a malt beer, right? It's a little bit rich, rounder, a little bit more fruitier. It goes well with food as well, whereas opposed to maybe a light and fresh beer, you can have it by itself, but more of the malt beer, then you want to have a little bit of food with it, a little bit of brine or all of that. And then you might have like a big, normal regular draft, that's very, very big, very, very heavy and goes great with food. Same thing with wine. Yeah. So when you talk about body, it's how it feels in your mouth. Yeah. White wines are usually lighter and red wines have got more body. Yeah. And this also has a lot to do with the alcohol content as well in wine. So when we look at light and fresh wines, we're looking at your champagne, your MCC with this method Cap Classique, any sort of sparkling wine, so like a Prosecco or something that's not said, it does not say MCC, your Gewürztraminer, your Rieslings, your Pinot Grigios, your Rosés, your Sauvignon Blancs, and any unwooded Chenin or an unwooded Chardonnay. So your primary flavors, we get a lot of what we call green and citrus and primary flavors. So this would be your lemons, your limes, your grapefruits, your apples, your gooseberries, your pears, your tropical fruits, your melons, your passion fruit, your floral, your roses, your violets, especially with the aromatics like the Gewürztraminer and the Riesling, you get a lot of that floral, a lot of that rose, a lot of that violet, and then obviously cut grass. Secondary flavors come more a little bit from intervention in the cellar from the winemaker. So we get a lot of honey, we get toast, we get petrol. A lot of these flavors you'll find more as well in the aromatics, so your Gewürztraminer and your Riesling. So light and fresh white wines are great served on a hot day and also as an aperitif and served with lighter style wines, food, so like salads, Asian style dishes, light dishes, and all of that. Yeah. So light and fresh, easy drinking, quaffable, in my opinion. It means you can just drink bucket loads of it. And especially now, I think we're going into summer. So your rosés are going to start picking up. Your Sauvignon Blancs and your Pinot Grigios are really, really going to start picking up. And people are going to be starting to love that. As the industry opens up, people are going to start drinking more. So rich, round, and fruity. So this is your Chardonnay. So this is a lot to do with wines, white wines that have got more body, feel much, much rounder in your mouth. So these are Chardonnays, these are Viogniers, these are typically white blends, and then a wooded Chenin Blanc. So we get less of the green citrus, more of the orange, the limes, the lemons. You get a lot of notches, you get peaches, pears, apples, pineapple, melon, peach, apricot, and nectarine. Secondary flavors, we get more of the smoke, butter, vanilla, toast. So secondary flavors come from intervention in the cellar by the winemaker. Yeah. So this means if the winemaker puts your wine in oak, right, it'll give all these additional flavors. Or if you go through malolactic fermentation, this is for, especially for Chardonnays, that buttery, vanilla-y, toasty, cheesy breadiness. A lot of that comes from the malolactic fermentation. So those are secondary flavors when now the winemaker is in the cellar and is intervening and doing things just to add to the flavor profile. I find a lot of these, the rich, round, and fruity, are best served with your food, more seafood. So if you're on the coast, more Swahili type dishes, curries, coconut curries, and anything like that, but also great with chicken, duck, turkey, and anything like that. If we go to medium bodied and elegant, so more medium bodied, more elegant, you have your Pinot Noirs, your Merlots, and your Pinotages. For these, what I also find is these are great for summertime as well. And especially if you're working in like a camp in the middle of nowhere and it's really, really hot. If you're serving your Pinot Noirs, your Merlots, and Pinotages, just especially Pinot Noir, you should always, always serve it slightly chilled. Yeah, not like serving temperature of like Sauvignon Blanc or Chardonnay, but slightly chilled. But even Merlot and Pinotage love a little bit of slight chillness, especially in a hot climate. Then when you have them with the food, they just are so actually refreshing. So for red wines, we get more of these red fruit flavors, so red fruit, black fruit, and a lot of herbaceousness that comes in. So we get raspberries, strawberries, cherries, plums, cranberries, blackberries, black plums, black cherries, black currants, and then a lot of herbal like mint, rosemary. So I always say to people that especially when we're doing training camps, there are all these things that we talk about that maybe you don't taste every day. You've never really smelt it or eaten it, like a gooseberry or a black cherry or red cherry, but I think it's always important, especially when you're describing wine, when you take the glass and you smell it, think about what comes to you. Like think about things that remind you of your country or your home or whatever it is. Think about all those things that are relevant to you, and then describe those with the wines, and it really, really helps, because if I say to someone, oh, it tastes like a gooseberry, but we don't grow gooseberries in Kenya, so nobody knows what a gooseberry tastes like. I actually can't remember, and I think there's like 2 of them. But anyway, the point is, sorry guys, we just had a small technical difficulty. Okay guys, so small technical difficulty here, but now I'm back. Okay, talking about the medium-bodied and elegant, great with food as well, lunchtime wines, and also for sundowners as well. And as much as you can, guys, if you're in the bush, just kind of slightly chill these wines. They taste so much better. Everyone always asks, like, why sometimes do we like either let a red wine breathe or do we chill it a bit? When stuff is served too warm, it always feels like it's out of whack. Like it's, like a bicycle spoke, it has all these bicycle things. And then when it's you've got one little thing sticking here, one thing sticking here, thing sticking here. So when you kind of like bring it together and cohesive, everything runs smooth, everything tastes smooth, everything tastes better. So I say the same thing with wine, especially your medium-bodied wines. Great with if you serve game meat, chicken, duck, even pork, pizza, lasagna, Italian-style dishes, pasta, or all of that. And less alcohol, and then more of your bigger reds. Our last ones are our full-bodied and powerful. So these are typically your blends, your Shirazes, your cabs, if you have Malbecs, anything like that. So full-bodied and powerful, like, these are wines you just don't, for me, you just don't play with them, right? But amazing with food, like, because of all these complex notes in them, go so well with food, and great for, like, sitting, having a beautiful dinner, a beautiful steak, or having a beautiful bonfire out in the bush. Work really well. So we get a lot of darkness: blackberry, black plums, black cherries, black currants. Herbaceousness, you'll pick up bell peppers, you'll pick up mint, you'll pick up rosemary. And then you get the white and the black pepper, the licorice, and the pepper especially on the Shiraz, that, and that smokiness and that gaminess. Secondary flavors, and this is primarily from aging in oak or fermenting in oak barrels. So you get smoked vanilla, coffee, cedar, dark chocolate, and coconut. So yeah, best served with food, cold days, evenings, more evening time, heavier meat dishes, brine meat, steak, venison, lamb. So the important rule is, I think as well, traditionally we say white wine and white meat, red wine and red meat, but everything is always about personal preference, especially with your guests. So, as much as you can recommend based on the flavor map, always remember to ask your guest what they like, what they enjoy, and then serve based on that. Yeah. Okay, back to our slideshow. Okay, so we talked about I hope you guys are putting down your questions. Let me just keep going down in my notes. So let's talk a little bit about the wine making process. So we obviously make white and red wine, yeah? I think what's also important about wine making is this kind of understanding the growth process. Yeah. So when we grow grapes, they grow on a vine. Yeah. We don't plant them in the ground and, rip them up and all of that. They grow on a vine and it has a life cycle. Yeah. It's about like a 7 to 9 month life cycle. Yeah. So basically, like any other fruit, in winter, it's dormant, nothing grows. Yeah, just finish. Right. Then we start as it starts warming up, and depends on where you are. So we have two different growing seasons for the northern hemisphere, and then also for the southern hemisphere. So usually harvest for southern hemisphere is between end of January up until March, and then flipped for the northern hemisphere. So basically, your vine has a life cycle. The vine will be bare, then little flowers start growing, and then we have what we call the bud burst, and then the grapes start growing. What's important to know, when all grapes are growing, they all start as this like green color, like like the skin of a green apple. Almost that color. So all grapes start that color. They go to green. And then they go through a process called veraison, where they change color. So they change from that green, apple green, sort of to like a beautiful gold, a greeny gold color for white grapes. And then they turn into red and purple for red grapes. Yeah. How does a winemaker know when the grapes are ready to be picked? A lot of time this is from experience, right? So you've been monitoring the growing season, you've been looking at the rainfall, you've been looking at the sunlight, you've been looking at all of these things and seeing what has sort of affected your harvest for that season. So, but a lot of the time, the ripeness is determined by your acidity levels and your sugar levels. So if you guys ever read tasting notes, they'll have all of these things like what's the acidity, what's the residual sugar, and all of that. But basically, each winemaker knows what he wants his sugar levels to be, his acidity, and all of these other things. So for him, a lot of the time, the ripeness is determined by that. But I'm sure there's also a lot of just picking and tasting and knowing, have been done this for a long time. When everything is great. Once the grapes are ready, we harvest and then we take to the cellar and then we start making wine. The important thing to know about wine making is when we make white wine, we ferment only with the juice, but when we're making red wine, we ferment with the skins on. Yeah. So this color for red wine comes from the skin, and that's why we use it in winemaking. So that's the big difference between white wine and red wine. Yeah. A white wine is what we call done more at a cool ferment, and that's because we think white wines are a little bit more delicate. So if we do it at a very, very hot ferment, like like when you make a traditional brew, all of those delicate fruity lemon, lime, cut grass, all those beautiful flavors that we kept talking about in the flavor map can disappear. So we do what we call sort of a cool ferment because we want to keep the delicateness and really, really retain those flavors. Whereas for red wine, it's done at a warmer ferment. That's because you need to work harder to extract as much color and flavor and all of that from the skins. Yeah. So we harvest our grapes, we get them to the farm. We separate all the bad stuff. We take off all the stalks. You can use a machine for this, or you can use your hand, and then we start the wine making process. Yeah. So fermentation for white wine. We press the grapes, we get the juice, we start fermentation. Depending on the grape variety, the winemaker might put it in oak, or he will start a process called malolactic conversion. Yeah. I talked about the pulp of the grape at the beginning, and I think it's also on your notes that you find acids in the pulp of the grapes. So malolactic conversion is a process where we convert malic acid, which is kind of sour, into lactic acid, which is creamy and rich in flavor, right? And you add a specific bacteria. Don't ask me the name of the bacteria, But again, that chemical process, then that gives you an additional flavor to the wine. So that's why Chardonnay, you get that creamy, buttery taste. Even with Chenins, you get these beautiful mineral notes, these beautiful like vanilla sometimes as well. So just kind of depending. So malolactic can take place in a steel tank, it can take place in an oak, it can take place in all of these different types of storage vessels. So when I'm talking about intervention by the winemaker, that's exactly what it is. And you can do malolactic fermentation for white wine and also for red wine as well. Yeah. So we do our whole fermentation, we do all these fancy things, and then what we will do is then we will filter and fine the wine to get rid of all those dead blobs and things that we don't want. Filter fine, and then we will bottle the wine, and then we will send it out to market. An important thing I want to just mention here is about the use of sulfur in wine, because I get this a lot, especially when it's South African wine and people say, oh, South African wine has got too much sulfur in it. It gives me headaches and all of that. It's a big fat lie. So basically, sulfur has been used from the beginning of winemaking, and it was used very much as a preservative, right? So as much as, wine is alcohol, whatever, we have to put a little bit of it in there to stop it from keep fermenting in the bottle, and then from it going off. So it was used a lot right in the beginning. They used to use sulfur as a preservative. So actually the amount of sulfur that you put in wine is heavily regulated and controlled. So it's not like they're just getting buckets of sulfur and pouring it in South African wine. There's more sulfur in a can of Coke than there is in a bottle of wine. There's more sulfur in like processed meats than there is in a bottle of wine. So some people are very sensitive to other chemical compounds that are found in wine. So a lot of the time, that is what they're reacting to. They're not reacting to the sulfur, because if you have a sulfur allergy and whatever, that's a very serious thing. And, if there was that much sulfur in wine, a lot of people would be dead. But I know I react to certain compounds in wine, especially white wine, more than red wine. So I actually can drink more red wine than white wine. And that's just because it's my body reacting and being more sensitive to all these elements in the wines. So when people tell you that South African wine has too much sulfur, that is a myth and a fallacy, a very, very bad one. And you tell them that's not actually true. And if they don't believe me, or they can Google it and it will tell them. Yeah, so it's very, very heavily controlled. So that's just important if people ever complain to you about that. So let's talk about quickly during this winemaking process. We talk about the vintage. On the bottle, you will always see the year. So vintage refers to the year the grapes were harvested. So why is that important is because, number one, it tells you, was it a good year or was it a bad year, right? If anyone's a farmer here, they can remember the drought years, right? Or the bad years or the fire years, right? Especially in South Africa as well. We can talk about like 2018 when there were a lot of wildfires and whatever. Like 2018 maybe was not such a great year. But everyone talks about 2009 being an amazing year for wine and 2015 vintages being amazing. So that's what it stands for on the bottle. So the important thing about vintage is, some wines are made to drink now. Some wines are made to age in a cellar for 50, 60 years. But for the most part, a lot of wines that we sell, that a lot of people are drinking and enjoying, are younger vintages, right? So we're in 2029. So if you're drinking a Sauvignon Blanc, you should be drinking like a 2018, 2019, 2020, if you can get your hands on that. Red wines as well, like a 2017, 2018. So basically, when it comes to vintage, a lot of people might ask you, oh, what is the vintage, right? So some people prefer more of older style wines. So, it's like, old people, the older you get, the wiser you are, and all of that. So it's the same thing with wine. Yeah, some wines are made to age, some wines are made not to drink now, but it's just important when people ask you about the vintage, that's what it is. But generally your white wines, especially your Sauvignon Blancs, try and make sure you've got current vintages wherever you're serving. So if you've got like an easy drinking house, wine that you're serving, make sure it's not like a 2012 Sauvignon Blanc or a 2012 Petit Pinotage or something like that. Pay attention to vintage. A lot of wine is made to drink now, and then some wine is made to age and to drink later. Cool. So I think during this time, what's also important is, with all of this COVID stuff going on, it's a great time for you guys to kind of go through your wine lists again, right? Make sure you know the varietals you're serving, right? So I'm sure if I was in a classroom right now and I asked everybody, what beers do you serve? Everyone would tell me all the beers, and probably all the beers that you serve in your country. You tell me all the whiskeys, you tell me all the gins, and then if I ask you about the wine list, you'll be like, oh, we have red wine and white wine, which is wonderful. That's great. But, as much as you know everything else, as a wine steward, it's important to know everything on your list. Know what your red wines are, know what your white wines are, know what you serve by the glass, know what you serve by the bottle. Also, what's important, we've been having a lot of supply issues, I know, at this time, right? If you don't have a certain wine in stock, right? Tell the guests and tell them, okay, fine, we don't have this, but this is the suggested replacement or substitute, right? And even whoever you're buying from, your suppliers or whatever, always ask them for a recommended substitute, and things sort of go back to normal. Yeah. So know what your red wines are, know what your white wines are. If you have any sparkling wines, know which one's a champagne, which one's an MCC, and which is just a normal sparkling wine. And as much as possible, also try and figure out where the wines are from. So if you've got wines that are not from South Africa, you should say, oh, we have a French Bordeaux, or we have a Rioja from Spain, or we have a Malbec from Argentina, or, all of that. So just take this time to just kind of, pick up your knowledge again. I kind of talked about this earlier on the wine service. So talking about the wine serving temperatures, serve wine at the correct temperature is very vital to ensure that you give your guests the best experience. If it's too warm, it becomes very acidic, and there's an overpowering aroma of the alcohol as it evapes, which kind of hides all the beautiful flavors of the wine. So white wines, light and fresh, serve ice cold at 48 degrees. So should always be served chilled straight from the fridge or an ice bucket. Yeah. And also important, guys, if you're putting wine in an ice bucket, don't put like 3/4 water and 2 ice blocks, right? What's going to happen? The ice is going to melt in the water anyway. So all you're basically doing is your wine is swimming in some ice water, and we don't want that. Yeah. So always make sure, I always try and do like more ice and then a little bit of water. And especially if you're in a hot climate or out in the bush, yeah, the ice is going to melt outside anyway. So rather make sure it's like really, really cold and you've got more ice than water in there. There's nothing worse than somebody serving me wine that's been swimming in a bucket. Yeah. So rich and fruity, serve from the cold chilled about 8 to 12 degrees and serve straight from the fridge or an ice bucket. So traditionally your Sauvignon Blancs, your Rosés, your Rieslis, Gewürztraminer, all of those more light and fresh, serve them really cold. Yeah. So I know we can't all have a thermometer and test the temperature, but serve them cold. And then you're rich and colder is always better than too warm, right? I'm sure we all agree. The rich and fruity, still cold, but it doesn't have to be as cold as the light and the fresh. Yeah, so your Chardonnays and any of your wooded wines and your white blends. Mediumbodied and Elegant, serve cooled at 14 degrees, especially at lunchtime for the reds. So again, yeah, pop them in the fridge before service and then take them out. And yeah, you can put them in an ice bucket if they're a little bit warm, but otherwise, if not, just keep them out. And then you're full-bodied and powerful, the big bad boys. So talk about room temperature, right? So when they talked about room temperature, they always talked about room temperature somewhere in, you know, in France somewhere, some beautiful valley overlooking a river, and it's like, you know, 17, 16 degrees out there. They didn't think about what that meant in Africa, right? So room temperature is not our room temperature, guys. Yeah, our room temperature is way too hot, way too hot. So as well as for the full-bodied and powerful, also serve them slightly cooled. Again, you can't figure out what 18 degrees is, but it's always okay to chill some of your red wines before service. Yeah. It's so important. Like the worst thing is you have a beautiful bottle of wine and it's served too warm and it just kind of just literally goes through the guest, right? It just passes them, and we don't want to do that. We want to give them amazing guest experiences. Again, with wine service, always when you open a bottle, please write the date and the time when you open the wines, right? We shouldn't be keeping bottles that we've had open for 5 days and still serving them to guests. It's not okay, yeah? We should be trying as much as possible, 2 days max, maybe 3, yeah? Even when you open a red wine, put it in the fridge, especially if you're out in the bush. You don't have to leave it outside. Put it in the fridge. It will help it keep preserve it for a little bit longer. And then what's great about that is that before service, you just pop it out the fridge as well, and then it will sort of, you know, warm up to the room temperature. And if a wine is too cold, like don't, you know, go put it in the sun for it to warm up, right? Because we never put wine in direct sunlight or direct heat. Just leave it out to sort of warm up as well, which is very important. Yeah. Okay, guys. So I will take some questions now, if anybody has any. I know we had a couple of questions. Let me find them. So Peter Ruitha from Sasab had a question. What is the best recommendation for sweet red and I'm assuming a sweet white wine? So what I would say about sweet wine, you know, the thing is, you know, there's still a lot of people, especially in Africa, especially more of your local guests, your local tourists, who are maybe not, you know, wine connoisseurs, or they don't drink wine a lot. For them, something that's very easy to drink is a sweet wine, so a sweet white or a sweet red. Yeah. So I would always say, you know, if you do get a lot of local guests at your establishments, and I think this applies a lot to more to restaurants and maybe not so much to guys out in the bush, but if you do get them, just keep a couple on hand, and whatever you have, you just basically give them. So we sell Jam Jar. I think that's one of our brands, and we also, which I think is a great sweet wine. So if you guys are ever looking for a really good sweet wine, you should try and get some Jam Jar. But you know, if you don't have a sweet wine, try a Sauvignon Blanc. Especially if you have one that's very light, fresh, and very fruit forward, or also try a rosé. That seems to work quite a bit for people who have more of a sweet tooth. Priscilla from Giraffe Manor says, which wine has the most alcohol content, and how long should a wine age to be considered the best? Red wines typically have more alcohol than white wine, but it just depends. You will find some white wines at like 14%. But what we would call an unfortified wine, usually the highest alcohol content is 14.5%. Yeah, anything over that is what we would call a fortified wine, which they've added alcohol to increase the alcohol content. So typically red wines have more alcohol than white wine. So Cab is going to have more alcohol than like a Pinot Noir, for example. And how long should a wine age to be considered the best? This is very much dependent on the wine you're buying, and you know, sometimes it's the recommendation from the winemaker. So if you guys look at the back of a wine bottle, it will always tell you, where the wine comes from, the region, maybe an interesting story and some tasting notes, right? Sometimes they'll give you serving recommendations. So they might say, okay, you can cellar this for 5 to 10 years, right? So if you got a wine that's from like 2015 and they say, oh, it's good to cellar for 5 to 10 years, it means you can open it from 2020 onwards. It would be great to drink. If you bought it in 2015, it might not be so great in 2016. So give it some time. So give it 5 years or another 10 years. Yeah. But a lot of the time, there are winemakers, what they do is they will actually bottle their wine and then they will keep it. They won't sell it. They will release different vintages every year, because that way they want the wine, when they now put it in the market, they want it to be at its best, like it's its best drinking level. So yeah, sometimes you'll find that. So that's why sometimes you'll buy reds and you'll buy like a 2015 or a 2014 now. You won't find a 2020 in that specific wine. That's because they're only sort of, releasing some of their older vintages. And like, for example, like in Europe, they have much stricter rules on wine. And so, just you can make a wine, but you have to age it for a certain amount of time and all of that. So it just really, really depends. But it depends on your palate as well. The older the wine gets, it moves away from its freshness more into, smoother vanilla, chocolate flavors. And then if it's getting really, really old, it gets on these very gamey, like porty, smoky, salty, type of flavors. So some people love that, and then some people absolutely can't stand it. So read your guest when you're trying to serve vintages. When is the best time to use a decanter? I got one from And Beyond. I would say if you've got a wine that's probably older than 5 years, you should use a decanter. And so the decanter is great, right? Because it adds to the whole flair of like wine service and all of that, right? But the whole point of the decanter is just giving that red wine, air and time to breathe, right? So I always say, like, red wine is like, a rose petal, it's in the bottle, it's been in the bottle for God knows how many years, and you can't get anything nice from it. But if you kind of open it up, everything just kind of comes out, right? Like you open up a rose petal, a rose flower, and all these beautiful aromas come out. And the same thing, I think, for red wine. So when you pour it in a decanter, it just helps to give it more of that oxygen, feel more of the air, get it to unwind, unfurl from itself, And a lot of the time, the decanter is all about the occasion, right? If you know how to, open the bottle, decant it properly, use the candle, all of that, serve it properly, it's such an amazing experience. But just don't do it just for the sake of, doing it. But especially if you've got older vintages and you have people that will enjoy that whole tradition about it, I would definitely say go ahead and decant your wines. But definitely older vintages, go ahead and decant your wines. Okay, any more questions? Let's check. Oh, wow, lots of questions. Okay, so hi everybody, Christine, Caroline, Cobus, Edmund, Esther. Okay, great, guys. I don't see any more questions. Thank you for joining. Let me just have a couple of notes to the end. The course is still available until the end of October. So you have 1 month to motivate your all your colleagues and finish the course together. If you successfully finish the course, we will send you a digital certificate via email. The pass rate is a minimum of 70%, and if you get a wrong answer for the test, your knowledge quizzes, refresh the question and try a second time. So if first you don't succeed, keep trying again. And if you have any questions, share it with your other learners on the dashboard, or also email Richard at undertheinfluence.co.za. Rich, do you want to just give a closing goodbye? Yeah, okay, cool. Guys, thank you. Thank you everybody for joining our Wine 101 webinar. If you have any questions, please email us and we will be here. Hope to see a lot more of you guys in the camps when things open up. Stay safe and wear your masks. Bye.